Anyway, good morning. Good morning. My name is Tudor Price. I am the Deputy Chief Exec at the Kent Invicta Chamber of Commerce. I tend to look after the international trade and business support side of our organisation. And of course, business support has led to lots of questions around remote working, the legalities, the formalities, the obligations, the etiquette, the protocol, what's acceptable, what's not acceptable, and general sort of sense of how do we go about working these days. And that's this session really was sort of partly sort of brought about at my request, because I had lots of questions around how do I work and work remotely with my team, and how do we look after them. So we've assembled together the great and the good, who are going to sort of cover off most of the aspects. But this, of course, is very much a new way of working for most of us, and so there will be questions to which we don't know the answer to, but we will certainly hazard an opinion, or offer up an opinion at least, to see whether or not we can get a consensus on how things are going to unfold. But there are some practicalities. So we have assembled our experts for you this morning. Now, I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves briefly, just so you know who's talking from where. And then I will ask them just to sort of offer up an opinion as to what they think the current situation, how it's working in terms of that sort of remote aspect, and where this might head over the next few years, and what will ultimately sort of be needed of us as employers and as employees. So without further ado, I'm going to go with ladies first. So Nell, good morning. Would you like to introduce yourself?
I will, if I can stop myself from coughing from just breathing something around the way. Sorry
okay.
about that. So I'm Nell. I'm the head of people here at Sleeping Giant Media. So for those of you who don't know, Sleeping Giant Media is a digital marketing agency based in Folkestone. So we help people with their online and offline marketing. My role at Sleeping Giant Media is to look after the people, make sure that they've got everything they need to be happy, efficient, and skilled in their roles. And that's me in a nutshell.
Thank you very much indeed, Nell. And of course, Sleeping Giant have a well-deserved reputation for being sort of quite on the cutting edge in terms of workforce management and opportunities. So that's brilliant. Michelle, let's come to you next. Good morning, Michelle.
Morning, Judah. Morning, everyone. So I'm Michelle Saunders from the Kent and Medway Healthy Workplace Programme. We are a KCC and Medway Council funded programme supporting wellbeing for businesses of all sizes and sectors across Kent and Medway. And I'm here with my colleague, Wack Dust, this morning as well. It's great to be here.
Right, Michelle, thank you both very much indeed for joining us. Let's come across to Rob from Infotech. Rob, good morning.
Hi there, Tudor. Hi, everyone. I'm Rob. I'm Marketing Manager at Infotech Solutions. We're an IT support company based up in Rochester, serving the whole of Kent. We've kind of been living with this sudden change to remote working for well over a year now. So it's kind of also changed the way that we've had to work as well, which has been a challenge throughout, but something that we kind of really stuck at very well.
I guess from your side of the coin, it's been quite busy as well. I imagine everyone's sort of asking for solutions and bits and pieces, but we'll come into that in a bit more detail later on. Let's move across to Lewis. Good morning, Lewis.
Good morning, all. My name is Lewis. I'm the Apprenticeship Development Manager at Mid-Kent College. We're one of the 4 FE providers now in Kent that provide training to collectively as FE colleges. We provide training to around about 15,000 16 to 18-year-olds a year at the moment as an FE sector. But also collectively between us, we're all delivering to around about 4,500 to 5,000 apprentices collectively as FE providers. So just here to give you some of the training solutions and some of the apprenticeship solutions that we've had to sort of adapt to and work with employers to adapt to during this lockdown period.
And of course, no longer an age limit on apprenticeships, I believe. So it could be of all ages and existing employees. Is that right?
Correct. I was going to say our actual oldest apprentice on the books is 68, who's returned to
Brilliant.
Education to do a engineering degree apprenticeship to upskill themselves in the end of their time at work to do their masters in it, or masters in their degree in engineering.
Inspiring, if not a little bit humbling as well for all of us. Brilliant. And last but by no means least, Colin, good morning.
Good morning. I'm Colin Smith. I'm an employment lawyer at Braciers. I have been for about 20 years, so getting to the point where I've seen various things come around and go around, and it's going to be interesting to see where we go in the next year or so with flexible working, and whether it sticks or whether it dies out swiftly. We shall see.
Excellent. Well, we shall see indeed. Okay, well, thank you very much. That is our panel, to the great to the good. We've covered most of the aspects of remote working, so we'll find out a bit more about what they think. We're going to come back to you, Nell, first. So, what's your opinion? Is this a good thing, a bad thing, where we are now?
I think it depends on the industry, obviously. So from our perspective, the ability to work flexibly has been a massive boon for us, because it's something that we can adapt to and provide our staff with a little bit more flexibility. So we've got multiple people who either want to go out jogging in the mornings or a yoga class in the evenings, which historically we haven't been able to do, but being able to pivot as swiftly as we have over the last few months, they're able to do that. So it's giving them more of a work-life balance. And in terms of the productivity within the business itself, we've only seen productivity increase over the last few months. So for us, it's been quite a boon. But in terms of whether it stays or whether it's sustainable, that's a different question.
Oh, interesting. Okay, that's fine. Brilliant. That's work-life balance. I think we're going to hear a lot more of that this morning. That's obviously the key phrase. Something which I know for many decades, a lot of people have been trying to achieve the right balance, get that equilibrium in their life. And of course, productivity again is always are we getting our bang for our buck? You know, we're paying our employees. Are we making sure we're getting our hours? But then are we measuring hours and all the rest of it? So interesting. Okay. Nell, thank you very much indeed. Michelle, what's been your take on the last 18, 15 months?
Oh, I think it's definitely been challenging for businesses, and I completely agree with Nell. It depends on the industry. I mean, we support a number of businesses across Kent and Medway who've had to stay open, working from their usual base. When you're talking about sort of warehousing, transport businesses and manufacturing, so obviously they haven't been able to benefit, apart from maybe some of their HR and IT teams working remotely. Again, I think it is down to work-life balance. We're able to harness some of those benefits to maybe be at home if we've got children, be at home for them in the afternoons, and maybe work a bit more flexibly for caring responsibilities. I think it's a great benefit for the green agenda as well. If we can cut down our travelling costs and commuting and not spend so much time sat in traffic, that's definitely good for the environment and more productive as well. I mean, who wants to spend two plus hours a day sat in traffic on a daily basis? I mean, obviously sometimes face-to-face meetings and events are essential, but if we can keep those to the real essential ones and not do that unnecessarily, that's of benefit. And whether or not it will sort of continue, I think that depends on how successful businesses manage to make it and how they manage the situation and the challenges. Because even with work-life balance, obviously there is a danger of people working remotely that they're not switching off. So it's about businesses being able to put things in place to support their staff to manage that work-life balance and having it not go too far the other way, or people working all hours because they're at home and they haven't got that need to switch off and get home.
Interesting. Yeah. So there's that longer term aspect, the challenges in particular about, okay, this has been great for some, but you know, how's it going to play out over the long term? What's going to be the side effects? Excellent. Rack, did you want to add to that at all?
Yeah, thank you, Tudor. I think what Nell and Michelle were really sort of hit the nail on the head, really. But I guess there's also looking at another side of it is really strong, effective communication from line managers and working closely with members of staff. Obviously, it depends on what side of what type of organisation and what sector you're in. But certainly, I think there's, you know, we want people to be able. The health and well-being is such an important part, and for line managers to be able to discuss that in an open way with staff is such an important thing to maintain that sustainability of efficiency and productivity. But I think what Michelle said as well, a really important part is also the green agenda as well, and keeping that sustainability up as well. So, yeah, I think communication is a real key factor here that comes across and goes across all of the questions that I've looked at that have been sent over. And you think in communication and line managers being well trained and being well versed, and also looking at the full adoption of hybrid business models as well. And I think that's something that HR teams, depending on what organisation you're working with, will be looking probably right now to adopt.
Very true. I think the hybrid is certainly the buzzword of the moment, I think, isn't it, really? Everyone's looking to. I think people would like to take the best of what we've experienced over the last 15 months, but obviously at the same time not throw out, you know, that culture and and some of this, the benefits of bringing a team together. So hybrid, I think at the moment, is the intended direction of travel, but no one's quite sure what that means or what that's going to look like. So again, we'll see if we can try and drill down. Rob, coming to you next.
Yeah, so as kind of been mentioned there already, a lot of it does depend on the industry. We support businesses across a wide range of industry, and we've seen like manufacturers who have just had to stay where they are, you know, in the kind of warehouse in those spaces there. But then we've also seen a whole range of different effects. You know, some customers still 100% remote working. The hybrid word's come back in again, as you said there, Tudor. It's looking like the most popular option. It's how we're tackling it at the moment as well. Just low numbers in the office for a couple of days a week. But I think the main thing is just setting up employees for success. Yeah, you know, by having the right equipment, by having the right policies in place, and using the right technology there. Before this all kicked off, that technology was there. This kind of last 16 months has seen that technology get even better, even stronger, even more resilient. So the solution is there. It's just making sure that it's set up correctly, and everyone has a good experience working from home.
Love that phrase, setting employees up for success. I'm gonna nick that one, I'm afraid. It's gonna be all over my my LinkedIn. Lewis, good morning. What do you think?
The last sort of 15, 16 months have been very sector dependent on the success of the sectors. As a provider, we go right across our engineering construction sectors, right the way through into, similar to the conversation, our admin support, IT, finance roles, HR, where actually some teams have succeeded, some have absolutely thrived being able to work from home. They've been able to actively engage. And because sometimes with their roles, they use technology a lot, they're used to joining into Teams calls now, Zoom calls, which has helped them to continue with their learning. However, some of the more hands-on sectors, our construction engineering, they found that very difficult at times, because actually trying to get them to work out how to actually sign into computers, log into Zoom, join a class has been quite challenging. And everyone goes, oh, the age of technology, not everyone is quite as technologically advanced as everybody else thinks they are, and especially youth are not as sometimes switched on to what they can or can't do in technology. If it's on a mobile phone, it's great, but actually give them a computer and ask them to sign into a piece of software or log in through a web portal, you can have some real quite difficult challenges. So I think it's been very sector dependent, but also we have had a number of apprentices still that are in our engineering manufacturing plants in Kent still producing. They're still out on site building buildings, taking part in projects. So it has been an interesting sort of 18 months really.
I think it has. For those of you old enough who remember the program Tomorrow's World, they used to always sort of predict that we'd all be sort of sat at home and operating machinery and equipment all remotely and sort of virtually and stuff like that. It seems like we've got ever closer to that reality than ever before, really. One of the phrases we've used quite a lot on the business support side of things is called accelerated evolution, where we've sort of seen this pandemic has actually brought about that sort of what were naturally occurring changes suddenly accelerate at some pace, which has taken a lot of people by surprise. And of course, skills being one of the interesting points there, Lewis, as you say, we're probably quite comfortable flicking through the mobile phone and getting the new app, or getting booking restaurant tickets and stuff like that. But then sort of trying to take yourself off mute or split your screen on is a totally different ask. But so we'll see what people have to say on that. Colin, your thoughts on the last 15 months? Colin. There we go.
Oh boy, error. Yeah, sorry.
Okay.
See what we were saying about not having technological skills to use the equipment properly?
Well, do you know what? All it means is there's now a requirement for some innovation where it's all voice activated. As soon as you start to speak, it'll take you off mute. So, it's just
you with a little pop-up window going, you're talking, but you're still on mute, you idiot. And you're
there we are. Rob, one for your team there, mate.
Yeah, but never mind. It's been, obviously over the last 18 months, we've all sort of been in emergency mode. And we are now at the first point in this whole journey where we are coming into supposed normality mode. And it's going to be very interesting to see how it develops over the next couple of months as we transition from being in deal with an emergency, everyone's in it and pulling in one direction, and remote working is necessary, to being in a position where it's no longer necessary, and therefore there's going to be a lot more pushback for those who want people back in offices, and a lot more heated debates are now coming to a pinch point within many businesses between, let's say, the pro-office advocates and the pro-hybrid or mobile or agile working advocates. So I think we are going to see a very interesting next couple of months, particularly leading up, let's say, to the end of the school holidays come September, where a lot of these issues are going to come to a head within a lot of businesses, because we hear a lot about businesses coming out and saying, well, this is our approach. But actually, if you talk to different people in different businesses, they all have rather different opinions, which are all going to come to a head very soon. So it's going to be very interesting to see where we go. I also picked up on a couple of points that other people have made, which is nobody really has debated the environmental pros and cons of home working versus office working, which is an important factor going forward in general life.
I think, to be fair, Michelle mentioned some of the sort of carbon savings of non-travel, which is an aspect to it. But is that the point you're referring to?
Yeah, I mean, I personally did have a quick look at this once some time back for a session I did, and I couldn't find any particularly clear viewpoint on whether or not home working versus office working is good or bad when you add up all the various factors. So that's what I'm still undecided on that one. If anyone has any great insight into that element of the debate, that would be fascinating. But I also think, as you say, some of the commentators have commented, we do have to bear in mind that for a lot of businesses, this isn't really an option. For a lot of industries, this isn't really much of a debate, because they still physically have to be there on site to run their shop, to run their retail, to run their leisure outlet, or to run their manufacturing facilities.
Absolutely. And I think when you refer to things coming to a head, obviously that's always the last undesirable position to be in, because it normally means they're looking for some sort of arbitration, and therefore things are not as smooth or resolved as they could be. But you're right. I think what we see here obviously is very much a sector-based approach around who can and who can't, and of course all the variations in between. Interesting, you mentioned school holidays. Now, I guess there's two takes on that, isn't there? One is you'll find working at home when the children are at school, but now they're home, is working at home such a great place to be? Would you rather be in the office in the peace and quiet? Or, of course, actually having them home and you being home means that you're able to sort of cope with the sort of arrangements a bit better without having to worry about childcare issues and stuff like that. So, again, two sides to every coin. And I think that's going to be the general sort of theme of the debate this morning, really, in discussion, is around, well, it could be this, it could be that. And I think the word "it depends" is going to play a big part in the whole conversation this morning. So brilliant. Thank you very much indeed for your first comments on this and your thoughts. We're going to move across into sort of a slightly more structured element to the discussion this morning. I'd invite you to pop questions into the live chat, and then we will invite you to sort of come on and ask the questions and maybe expand a little bit more, so you get the information you're looking for this morning. But we're going to start sort of going right away over to the more formal side of things, if you like. So obviously, as an employer, what are my obligations in terms of remote working? What are the things I need to be making sure, as the regulations stand right now, what do I need to sort of make sure is in place? And then perhaps we'll move across into perhaps some of the more duty of care side of things. So obviously, Colin, I'm going to come to you first. It's very much your sort of bag of tricks. So what are the things employers need to be thinking about for going forward with remote working?
On a pure technical level, there is a statutory right to request flexible working. It's hidden away in the Employment Rights Act 1996, if anyone's particularly interested. But there is a statutory right to make a request to work flexibly. You have to be an employee. You have to have 26 weeks continuous service. You must not have made a similar statutory request in the last 12 months. Basically, employers have a duty to consider that in a reasonable manner. Okay, I won't go into all the technical details, but there is this statutory right. Employees have to trigger it in a very specific way by making an actual specific request, saying I am in effect a statutory working request. Generally speaking, employers can turn them down, but they have to do so under one of 8 specific reasons, and they have to do so, broadly speaking, in good faith. Okay, so there's still a reasonably strong power at the moment for employers to turn these down, but there is a procedure you must go through and a sort of a process you must follow to deal with formal requests. Most requests employers are getting at the moment don't meet the statutory rules to trigger a formal request. They're just a general informal request, let's say. And there you just have to be cautious of more general duties such as indirect discrimination, which comes into play depending upon why they're making the request. So for example, if they're making a request for childcare reasons and primarily they're a woman, you can run into indirect sex discrimination issues. There may be reasons to do with disability that come into play. There may be other reasons that could trigger indirect discrimination. Of course, you can still turn them down, but you've got to justify that. Okay, that's a whole different topic altogether. And then you get those who just requesting it because they want it. And generally speaking, you can say yes or no to those. It's a contractual variation. You're free to agree or not. The only way you have to be careful is not being what we would call arbitrary or capricious in how you apply the process. In other words, you grant it to 9 people and you don't grant it to the 10th just because you don't like them.
Ah,
yeah, which would be
that's a shame.
More capricious and potentially breach what we call mutual trust and confidence. Yeah.
Now that sort of suggests on the premise that an employee makes that flexible working request. What about if an employer feels actually this is the way we want to go? We want to have everyone remote working. Where do we stand on that one?
Well, this has been an interesting point because we've had this debate with a number of employers because everyone's talking about, well, we're going to move to home working. We're going to flog the office. We're going to get rid of the building. And people forget that employees have contracts and the contracts say you work in an office. Most cases, mine does. Yeah. Everybody kind of accepted being sent home last year because there was no other choice. And those of us that were able to work from home were kind of grateful just to be able to carry on working. But now that I can go back to the office, strictly speaking, my contract says I work in the office. It doesn't say I'm required to work at home. So my employer doesn't necessarily have the right to insist that I do so. That would require my contractual agreement, in theory, to agree to work from home rather than work from the office on an ongoing basis. And that's something we haven't really discussed or tackled yet. We've all proceeded on the assumption of most people will want to do this and therefore they won't go, no, you've got to give me an office to work in. So
the dialogue is again sort of entering into that collective dialogue with everybody, trying to find out what their wishes are before you just sort of make any presumptions that that's the way people want to work, I guess.
Yeah, before you sell the building, you might want to check where you end up in terms of people wanting to work in an office and people wanting to work at home. Otherwise, you might be in for a rude shock when half of them go, no, I want to work in an office.
Nell, obviously you guys have been doing this sort of thing for quite a long time. You're also in an industry that works quite well, lends itself to remote working. And again, famously have very sort of flexible working arrangements. Is this something that you had built into your sort of employment contracts early on?
No, it's not. It's something that we've had to review. We recently undertook a contract review anyway, last year to do with the good work updates, obviously. But when it comes to working flexibly, we've been going off of people's acquiescence almost. We haven't got to a point where we think we're going to completely, bin the office. So it's going to be a flexible choice up to the staff member as to whether they want to use the office or they want to work from home within reason, and I can get into that later. But in terms of making any contractual changes, we're not planning on it because there will always be an office space available to people who want to work there.
Interesting. So I'm still interested in some of the sort of the obligations and sort of the regulations that need to be complied with a working situation. Rob, I'm going to come to you next, really, just in terms of, it might not be your area of expertise, but just in terms of sort of the home setup, are you familiar with any of the sort of the assessment and the legal requirements around sort of making sure people are comfortable at home in terms of their kit?
Yeah, I guess that comes more from a health and safety point of view, making sure like you have like the adequate supports for like mouse, the keyboard, things like that. So I guess it would follow the same kind of health and safety you follow when sitting at your desk. You want to replicate that when working from home. So you have the screen at the right eye level. You have the right kind of reach towards whatever keyboard you're using, whether a laptop or on a computer. So as far as I'm aware, it's the same as when you were working in the office.
Thank you. Michelle and Rack, what about from your perspective? Is there anything that you'd add to that sort of side of things? I just, one of the scenarios we came across recently was someone had built a shed, which they were very proud of, but it had no heating, it had no air conditioning, it was running off a 13 amp extension lead, and they were delighted. That was their home office. But as far as I was aware, the employer sort of said, "What?"
Injury. Obviously, you don't want people to be going off with repetitive strain injury or be ineffective because of things that have happened whilst they're working at home. I mean, you need to consider the individual circumstances, really. I mean, it's good that we've still got it in our employment contract that we've got an office space, and as we hear, most companies here are giving people the option. I don't think anyone can really be forced to permanently work from home without prior agreement. And one thing we've been asking businesses to consider is the home setup. I mean, we can't assume that everyone's got a nice spare room to work from with an adequate desk. Our company's prepared to provide desk equipment for people, not just computers and things, but actually somewhere to sit and chairs. And are you going to put yourself in a position where if people are hybrid working, they have a setup in the office and at home? Obviously, that's quite a big expense. But then also considering the home setup in terms of the domestic situation. So have you got people, I mean, we've had colleagues in our own team that have had to come into the office because partners are working shifts in manufacturing, so they can't possibly work from home on the phone, taking calls and in Teams calls all day when someone in the house is asleep. Or you've perhaps got 4 adults living in the same house, all trying to work from home in different organisations, can be a bit tricky. And sadly, we've heard a lot about during lockdown about cases of domestic abuse. And actually, for some people, as sad as it may be, coming into the office is a safe haven, and we must not take that away from people if that's the support that they need for their safety and their well-being in that respect. So lots to consider, I think, before we frame this out. I think, as you said earlier, there's 2 sides to every coin, and it's all got to be considered, and individual circumstances definitely taken into account.
Interesting. Yeah, that's a very good point, actually. I think sometimes it's an escape, isn't it, getting into the office? That is actually a place of refuge for some.
And in terms of sort of loneliness and social isolation, if you're if you have a colleague who lives alone and works alone, I mean, we have colleagues in our team and in organisations we support where people have spent 3 months not seeing any other adults or any other, if they're a single parent or any other people, if they live completely alone, and actually that's not good for our well-being. So it's getting that balance, I think, between harnessing the benefits of hybrid working but also addressing the challenges so that we're not making people unwell. And it really used to encourage people to undertake sort of that stress risk assessment framework that the HSE provides. So as you're looking at people coming back to work, going through those sort of questions, seeing if things are essential, if it's practical, and if it's causing them stress and anxiety, what you can do to alleviate that and get that balance.
Interesting. Okay, I'm just going to throw the question open to the rest of the panel, really, because are there any other things that the panel would recommend to an employer? Things you need to do, you need, must have. So obviously we've heard a lot about sort of contract variation. There's to be sort of an agreement to that variation before you just bowl ahead with making everyone work from home. Got to consider the health and safety aspects. Is there anything else that people would say needs to be in place or adhered to as part of remote working? Anyone else on our panel?
So one of the things I know we found very quickly when we went into lockdown was, yes, we might be an education establishment, but not all of our staff have laptops. Not all of our students have laptops. Not all of our students had broadband connections or even IT connections. If it wasn't their mobile phone where they had a small amount of data, they had no access to the internet. So it's also about making sure staff have access to the actual resource in the beginning. Because without that resource, you can't ask them to do the job you want them to do if they can't actually access the systems that you want them to access in such a way that you need them to be able to get in. I know, Molly, you had a couple of difficulties earlier with your internet. It's proven even now the internet connections are better than they have been, but actually there's still that risk that you need to be considerate with your staff if they're having those technical difficulties on a day when they're at work.
Interesting. Colin, anything else you think we ought to be aware of as employers, things we need to be taking into consideration about our obligations and legalities?
I mean, lots, I'm afraid. And we're at, as you say, we're at that point in this process where this informal arrangement that we've all muddled through is going to have to become more formalised. Otherwise, we're going to face chaos in 6 to 12 months' time if we just let it carry on as is without clearly defining what the parameters are, is my one concern at the moment. So, putting some examples, we have home working sounds great until the person decides that home working can be in Portugal, or in another case, France or Barbados. And you go, well, you said I could work from home. You weren't clear about where.
Mm-hmm.
That creates, it's not just, creates issues, it creates obviously tax issues, it creates regulatory issues, it creates practical issues as to, well, what if I need you in the office? Oh yeah, well, I can't do that. Yeah, so it sounds daft, but you do need to be specific about, if you're working from home, where home has to be, because it has knock-on consequences. You also have to consider practical issues, such as if people are working from home permanently, that's their base of work for tax purposes and expenses purposes. If they're working hybrid, it gets more complicated as to which one is deemed to be their primary place of work. And that's where my expertise on tax rules on that level stops. But I know you need to get to the bottom of that. Otherwise, you can end up in really tricky situations in terms of expenses, claims and tax and so on. So there's a lot to think about. But you also need to think about what are the requirements to come into the office. I work from home, well, I need you in for a meeting. Well, I can't come in on a Wednesday. And unfortunately, all of that needs to be thrashed out ideally and written down and in a clear contract. Because if this ad hoc, do what works, muddle through carries on for another 6 months, it will be much harder 6 months back into normality to then sit down and go, no, the base position is you work in the office. Well, it's not, because I've been back to working from home now for 6 months post the emergency period, let's say.
Mm.
So
is the advice there really to sort of basically sit down now and agree or define what working from home is going to mean, what the limitations and the parameters are around that, and then get that sort of obviously built into the variation of the contract?
Yeah, and this is the challenge for businesses, because businesses at the moment, including our own, still don't fully know what it's going to look like, let's say from September as the sort of pinch point of return to work after the school holidays. Yeah, businesses still don't quite know what employees are going to want to do. They're still not quite there in terms of what will work and what won't. But the longer we allow it to go on an ad hoc, make it up as we go along basis, the harder it will then become to move it to a formalized basis, as it were.
You are, and a few of you as well mentioned at the top of the meeting that you've got various helplines and some webinars and stuff that you're going to be doing on various topics that we're discussing here this morning. Again, I'd invite you, because Molly's jumping in and out with her connection, unfortunately, you're more than welcome to post those into the chat there for the benefit of everyone else that's with us this morning. But Colin, interesting, I think what I'm getting a feel for is there is sort of if you like, a checklist of things that employers need to be sort of thinking about, and sort of getting definitions or answers to, or even agreement to, prior to sort of making their statement, this is the way we're going to be. I think it's, as I said, I think it's the desired direction of travel. We're going to be hybrid working, but you're quite right, interesting in terms of where is home? As you say, it could be sort of halfway around the world, and in some cases that is absolutely fine and works really, really well. But how does that play out then in terms of your recruitment side of things? So yeah, some really salient points there, and stuff for people to sort of take away and put down. Someone just popped a question in, Paul. Thank you very much. Around workplace confidentiality. Who wants to answer this question? So obviously this is around data, and it's all suddenly we've got information being stored at home. So who wants to take that question?
I can do that, Tudor, because I was
Yes,
going
please,
to raise
Rob.
the point anyway of things to consider from home working. Remember that the compliances on your industry are still relevant to every one of your employees, whether they're in the office or working from home. So using GDPR as an example, if someone's using a shared laptop, whether that be shared with their partner or their kids, if they've got sensitive files on that laptop and someone else is using the laptop and go, oh, what's this, and click in it, that's technically a data breach. So you've also got to be aware with home working that those compliances, you're still ultimately responsible for that. So that will come back on the business. We've seen examples from the government of laptops left on trains or things like that. That's a data breach, So again, there's ways around that. There's security you can put in place. If a laptop is lost, then it can't be accessed, or files can be deleted remotely. So again, it's just being aware of your responsibility around those compliances and what solutions you can put in place.
Nell, from your point of view, obviously you've been down this road for a little while now. What have been the surprises, things, oh, actually, I hadn't thought of that. What have been the gotcha moments for sort of working with your team?
There's been quite a few. I think the biggest one was the learnings we had around communication. So in terms of trying to recreate the office environment at home is a nightmare. And again, I can go back into more detail in this later, but the communication really fluctuated from, we've got to give everybody all the information, which then people say, whoa, hang on a second, appreciate that you're keeping us up to date with what's going on, but at the same time, this is a little bit too much all at once. So going from that extreme to then the other extreme of people not knowing how to communicate properly, which is really strange, because obviously being mostly online, you know, although we had the office, there were still phone calls, there was still chatting, there were still video calls, just not the prevalence that we found afterwards. So getting people used to communicating in that respect was quite challenging, and something that we're still working on at the moment. So I think that was one of the biggest challenges, moving from being mostly office based to being totally home based.
That's interesting, and that touches very much on the point of culture and sort of communication, which Michelle was alluding to earlier in terms of making sure the staff, you know, their well-being side of things. There's an obligation. There's one question we had earlier, which was, is employee well-being a legal obligation? Colin, legal makes me come to you first. Is it a legal obligation, employee well-being?
It's a pretty broad question.
It is.
The answer is partially, but not necessarily entirely, and that's a complete cop-out. But we're actually doing a seminar on this at lunchtime on Thursday, on this whole issue of how far employers have to go these days to make employees happy or to fulfill their well-being, versus where do the legal duties start and stop. We all want employee well-being, we all want happy employees, but does the law require it, is a far more complex question. The answer is, the law doesn't go as far as saying you have to make your employees happy, but obviously you do have to provide them with a safe work environment and a suitable work environment, but it doesn't go quite as far as saying you have to make them happy at work.
So there we go, you don't have to be happy. You just need to be comfortable, which is halfway there, but interesting. And when's that webinar? That's on, is it tomorrow, did you say?
This Thursday, actually, yeah. And it's on this issue of where does the employer's duty start and stop, in terms of, do I have to make them happy, or do I, where are the actual legal duties? That's
really interesting. Yeah, again, so as we're discovering, there's lots of component parts to this, really. We've obviously got the sort of obligations, and in terms of the requirements as an employer, we've then got the sort of cultural aspects, and then we've got the performance aspects as well. So we'll find out a bit more. Before we move on slightly to sort of some of the more sort of technical side of things, and we'll sort of draw on Rob's experience there, are there any sort of parting to words of advice that you would give in terms of our employers' obligations, things that we need to make sure we've done before we embark on a sort of hybrid model or fully remote working? Can I ask the panel, are there any other things you might want to sort of throw into the pot there to take away? Michelle?
I did mention the HSE sort of stress risk assessment, but just it's a good opportunity as you return to work or start hybrid working, just to review your risk assessments for general work patterns. Just don't assume that what was successful in January 2020 is going to be fit for purpose now, really. Things have changed, people's situations have changed, so it's just worth revisiting all of those as sort of part of a return to work. And it's interesting, isn't it? We've really stretched our business continuity plans to the limit. Just an interesting thought when we've been chatting about if you're saying people working from home, to update your business continuity plan. Obviously, I'm getting a little bit out of my remit here. It's not really well-being, but what are you going to do if people are working remotely and they have a power cut or flood in their home? What are you going to ask them to do instead? Obviously, if that happens in the workplace, you've got a plan to move to another premises or send them home to work. But if that happens in their home, about being explicit about if you can't log on at home because you've got a power cut, then you do need to come into the office. And about keeping that communication open. As Rack said earlier, communication, I think, through all of this is key in keeping people informed and in supporting their well-being, making sure they know what's going on a day-to-day basis.
That's a nice segue, I think, into the technical side of things, really. And obviously we're going to draw quite a bit on your knowledge, Rob, but also just in terms of sort of shared experience from around the panel about what's worked well for their organisation at the moment. Clearly, we've talked about laptops and security breaches, confidentiality. We are no different to any other organisation. We have desktop PCs sat idle, gathering dust in the office. We also have some people with laptops, one or two using their own laptops, and we're sort of thinking, well, actually, that shouldn't be the case. We need to get control and have antivirus and all that sort of kit. So, okay, we're in a remote sort of setup. What are the sort of things that we need to be looking at from a technical point of view?
Yeah, so A, having the right technology in place, and then B, having the right security in place. That's kind of the approach we had to take when this all started, and we had every one of our customers to try and set up remote working. Let's try and get that technology in place so they can do that. While everyone was buying toilet paper and pasta, we were trying to buy laptops and struggling equally as much. It was an absolute nightmare at the start. Like, laptops were like gold dust, just trying to get all that equipment in. But then very, very quickly, you've then got to react and have the right security in place. And you've spoken about, like, can you use personal laptops, or do you have to use company supplied laptops? The biggest issue with that comes from how you're using the laptop. So I throughout have used my personal laptop because I've never connected to our company's network. I've never had need to. So that means any viruses or trouble that I get into is purely on this device. You know, it doesn't connect to the business network, and it can't spread that way. If people are connecting into your network to carry on with their work, then I would recommend a company supplied laptop, because then you can control the security on there, and you can make sure that that connection is secure. The antiviruses are in place. You can, everything that you would do in the office on the office PC, you then put in place on this laptop here.
Because I know a lot of employees like to use their own devices, and of course, sometimes, oh, I'm carrying two phones, I've got two laptops, I've got a Mac at home, or I've got, and so, you know, I think because we're encroaching into their personal space, sometimes they're quite resistant to sort of moving away from using a Mac, which they prefer to do at home, but actually they've got a Windows laptop we're trying to give them as a company. Are there sort of, is there ways of around that, or is it you know, really best to sort of take the whole sort of company-owned asset approach?
Yeah, that's kind of how we've kind of recommended it, because like I say, if you're going to connect to anything within your business, you need the security as strong as it would be in the office. And perhaps now that level was even increased, because as we all moved to remote working, that was a huge opportunity for all the cyber criminals out there. They're like, brilliant, new behaviors, fantastic, we can target that straight away. I mean, we even saw with Zoom, as everyone started going to Zoom, suddenly, like, Zoom bombing happened.
Zoom bombing was a thing, yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Exactly, so you have things like that. So it's that continuous, okay, we've shifted our behaviors, cyber criminals react, and then we've got to react on the back of that as well, just to make sure that then we're plugging those gaps as we kind of find them. And unfortunately, that's the way security has to be at the moment. Because they're so advanced, the cyber criminals, we're always kind of playing catch up. So that's again another big reason of having the company supplied laptop, because we can remotely install updates on the laptop, and a lot of those updates that you'll get through Windows or through your software is security fixes, because the hackers found a way in, and that has to be plugged, and then that's plugged with an update. So that's definitely been one of the really big things that we've pushed as this is why you need to use a kind of corporate device, because you can control this and install everyone's updates at a set time, and you know that the machine's continuously updated, you know that machine's got the right antivirus, you know that machine's using a secured VPN to connect to your network. So all those things are in place, and you're trying to keep the same security you would do when you're in the office.
Talking of offices, obviously, this is a great opportunity for cloud-based working, and many sort of platforms now, or, you know, software systems work off of cloud, but there's still quite a lot that have sort of on-premise servers and stuff like that. Is there pros and cons to either in this situation?
Yeah, so I mean, as I said at the start, I've been using a personal laptop because I'm lucky enough that everything that I use is either cloud-based or web-based. I haven't needed to connect to our server for any kind of installed devices on that. So for me, that's given me a lot more flexibility in how I can work. But for other people in the company, they've had to access that. So they've gone through that. The key is then put in a secure connection back into your network, you know, to make sure that you're not allowing access to people who shouldn't have access to it there. But as opposed to pros or cons, I mean, as we've seen with so many things, there's two sides to each coin, but both work and both work okay. It's just making sure you have security in place. So a lot of the kind of web applications I use, you can put two-factor authentication on, like you would say logging into your internet bank, and that allows a lot more security onto those as well, to kind of stop people accessing. Again, like the example, if you left your laptop on the train, having that two-factor authentication, they'd need like your phone as well to access the software or access the files on there. So again, it's just making sure that you put as much security as you can in place.
And I think, again, going back to Colin's point about sort of making, you know, putting these sort of rules and agreements in place around, you know, the mandatory use of 2FA if you're using company property, and making sure it's all connected. So some interesting advice there. Nell, obviously, how are you set up at your place? How's that working? Have you all got your own laptops, or, you know, is it preference or?
No, everybody's been provided with their own laptop, and obviously at the start of the pandemic, you know, a lot of people face the issues that people have already highlighted, you know, no room, no desk, no chair, no second screen, nothing like this. So our office looked like a war zone once people had been in to just collect everything that they possibly could and then take them back home. So it was an interesting cleanup process afterwards. But at the same time, we made sure that we were following DSC assessments. We made sure that people had everything they needed, because we are based on the cloud. We use the Google Drive system, which hosts all the documents, all the spreadsheets, everything that we need. We did have a VPN to connect to some of the services that are based solely within our office, but at the same time those services were limited, and then we found different ways of being able to approach them, so we weren't having to do that each time. So from our perspective, we are sort of quite resilient when it comes to working from home or working from the office, because we're using cloud-based systems, and all our laptops are provided by the company. We have the security features, we've got the monitoring features, we've got all of those kinds of things that have been placed onto the laptops of everybody's laptops, so that we can make sure that we're being as secure as possible. And like suggested, two-factor authentication, and just making sure that we've got also the policies and procedures to back it up, because as much as the you know, the security and the actual hardware software side of things is really important, we also need to be able to guide our people to knowing what is and what is not appropriate when it comes to the working environment, the laptops that we're using, making sure that, you know, they know exactly what is expected of them, so that there is no confusion there. So we've done all right, but it was a mad scrabble to begin with.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting anecdote, and one that we can recognise really, where we have cables and sort of half PC setups in the office where people have been in. It looks like the burglars have had a clear out and left all the rubbish behind. So yeah, we're in a sort of slight state of disarray as well. Bracious, obviously, you know, big organisation, and you're handling a lot of very confidential information. What was the remote working setup for you guys? How did that happen, or were you already sort of at that point?
We were lucky. Well, lucky or genius planning, really lucky, in that we moved to the cloud and we rolled out tablet devices to all of our fee earners at the end of 2019, which was put us in a very fortunate position that when the pandemic hit, we picked up, we went home, we carried on. But for the actual support staff who were desk-based, it was a bit more tricky. And that was the scavenger hunt that we've had described in a number of other scenarios of just pick it up, take it home. And it was literally pick them up, pick it up, pick the device up, pick the screen up, take the keyboard, chuck it in a box and walk out the office with it.
Yes, sounds very familiar.
Yeah, but fortunately, because of the setup, once you plug them in at home, they worked exactly the same as they do in the office. So we were lucky in that respect. The challenge we are now facing is the return to the office and the costs and expectations of hybrid working. As on our scale, kitting out people's home offices and kitting out their offices to the standard they've now become accustomed to in many cases whilst working at home and spending allowances on buying posh new office equipment is really quite costly. And
Yes.
consistent about that is going to be a challenge.
We're going to come back to that particular point in a minute, because I think that I'm just going to move quickly. We'll come back in a second about what is reasonable, and I guess, you know, like any legal, there's a definition to some degree of what's reasonable. But it's something we're going to hear a lot more of, I think, as we move across this. And again, these are the sort of things we need to have in place. You know, what are the limitations of what we will buy? We will buy a chair and a riser, but we will not buy a desk, or the case may be. Lewis, I just want to come to you on the skills side of things, because obviously Nell was saying that they're all cloud-based and two-factor authentication, and I can see a few people going to what. You obviously are dealing with a number of students, obviously, who don't necessarily have the assets or the resources in order to be able to work remotely. But then also there is that sort of other side of your business, where you are providing skills training for people who don't have that technical knowledge. How big a gap is it, do you think, in terms of certainly those that have a working environment where they can work remotely? How much of a challenge has it been? Is there a sort of simple solution to this?
So I think there's so for us, I'm going to do that. Let's say I'm going to look at the device side of life. We pushed out over 1,000 iPads to students, and around about 200 internet dongles in 6 weeks of going into lockdown. We had to push out internally to staff alone around about 150 laptops on each site. So we had about 300 laptops pushed to staff the week leading into lockdown, and then had to push out iPads to students. And we're still seeing now our intake for September. We've already got students saying that I'm joining you in September, but I don't have digital accessibility, whether that's as a device or as a internet connection. So it is that the divide is still there, and the digital divide is still there, and is really quite real. In terms of training, even internally, we're struggling to get some of our staff to understand, learning remotely, how to do something like two-part authentication, because actually it really is best done. I sit next to you and I show you, you click here, it goes this on your phone, that's the code you then put in there. And we've ended up pushing out green screens. So we're lucky we've got IT team and we've got media teams, and we actually had some green screens pushed out to some of the staff that have actually done physical recordings of them in front of a green screen showing everything they're doing of how to do two-part authentication, just so that we can push a YouTube video out to staff, which almost means they're sat next to them because they're sat in front of a video watching it and can follow the video. And it's having to look at how you adapt maybe what you might do as an induction with somebody, to, instead of having the ability to sit and show them physically, how can you make that induction still show somebody it? Is it a video recording, you're recording what you're doing, the clicks on the screen? Is it actually, I need to set a camera up next to me and physically record me and what I'm doing on the screen to show somebody how they might do something? And also the help guides that then you need to now maybe consider as an alternative, because you can't always just go, Tudor, I'm just trying to log into this, or I'm trying to find this, where is that again? Because that's what happens in an office. You can ask across the desks to somebody next to you. I know even now, especially when we're coming to our monthly funding returns, I pretty much live on a Zoom call for 8 hours a day for pretty much the week before we do our funding return every month, because actually it's the only way we all end up joining one single Zoom call, and we're all sat in the office carried on working but talking to each other on a combined Zoom call or a Teams call, purely because it gives us that ability to still have that dialogue that you might go, just a quick one, what's that, or where's that, can someone point me in the direction of this?
Interesting. I think we're going to come back to that again in a moment, because again, it's that sort of culture and sort of informal communication, which is something that's been sort of affecting us. There's a question again from Paul around sort of some of the minimum laptop requirements for antivirus software, conferencing software, data exchange, etc. Is there sort of minimum standards, Rob, or is it still very much dependent on your industry and who you are as an employer?
Yeah, a lot of it will vary on how you're using the technology, size of the business, lots of things like that. It's one thing that we have to stress a lot with like potential clients is that we haven't got all kind of a one fit all system for you. We have to understand how you're going to use it, and then we can advise the best way of tackling things. So yeah, it is hard to say here's like a bare minimum. Well, I say a bare minimum is at least have something when it comes to antivirus, you know, at least get something on there. But yeah, we like to speak to each business individually and then just work out how they're using technology, how they what needs they have, and then kind of put a solution together.
Yeah, I think again a lot will depend, as you say, whether they're connected to the network, whether it's all cloud-based, and sort of what other security measures and how you're accessing things. So it's going to be a very varied conversation. Colin touched on this a moment ago, and we're moving sort of slightly into the sort of the environment, if you like, and the culture side of things. What is a reasonable adjustment or provision for home working? You know, is it fair? Now, Nell, you mentioned that, you know, people have all sort of dashed home and things. Colin, you were talking about the cost of side of stuff, and Michelle, no doubt you've heard and given advice in terms around the sort of what the obligations are concerned. How far do you go in terms of kitting somebody out to work remotely? What's the decision-making process that you went through, Nell?
I mean, when it came to the start of it, we just went, everybody's got to have basically what they had in the office, because that's the only way that we're going to be able to continue doing what we can do effectively. So it took us a few weeks to make sure that everybody had that, but everybody was provided with laptop screens, risers, chairs, desks if they needed them, mouse, keypads, all the supports, all the different things that, you know, toggle things and connect things and all of this kind of thing. So everybody was provided basically everything they possibly needed to recreate the work setup at home. Moving forward, we're sort of going down the line of, okay, if this isn't an enforced thing, what are responsibilities? And obviously the responsibility is that you've still got to do the DSE. You've still got to make sure that people are working safely from home. So we've got to have a look at each individual as to what their needs are. And again, make sure the policies and procedures are sort of backing that up almost. So that's the route that we're going down, is now the individual needs rather than company-wide, because each person joining us moving forward is going to have different needs and need different things.
And is there a situation where, and I'm going to come to you on this question as it was asked second, Michelle, is there a situation where you said, I'm sorry, but your setup at home isn't adequate? You know, we can't we can't build you an office. You're going to have to be office based, or would you just not entertain employing them?
No, I don't think we'd not entertain employment. I think it would have to be a question of, I think I can take you a sneak peek into my home setup at the moment. So I'm not sat in an office. I'm in fact sat in my hallway, and there are the stairs.
Ah, yes.
So in terms of home setup, there is always a way of being able to pull something together, and we will work with each individual to make sure that they can have everything that they possibly need. If it was a question of literally, you know, they were sat in a cupboard under the stairs, cooped up like a shrimp and all of that kind of stuff, at that point, we'd need to have a conversation about whether they needed to be home office-based rather than home-based. But touch wood, we've not come up with a situation as yet. If people are applying for remote jobs, they usually have a remote working environment. So that's generally the view that we're taking with it. And if they're applying because they're local, then they can come into the office.
Michelle, have you dealt with this in your support situation so far?
I mean, so in our own organisation, we were quite fortunate in that we were working not remotely in the sense of working from home, but going out and about meeting with businesses daily. So we all had laptops anyway. A number of the team have been able to set up at home, and we were allowed to take keyboards and mice and risers and what we needed from the office, second screens if we wanted to. I actually have been in the office quite a lot because I just don't have space at home unless I've got probably 1.5 days a week when I could actually set up a place and work from home. But with my partner trying to work from home, and then when we had homeschooling, I was actually sat on the sofa some days, which is obviously not a long-term solution. And then again, in one of the lockdowns, I was actually redeployed as in Medway Council to work with some vulnerable people, making phone calls and arranging prescriptions and stuff. And from a safeguarding point of view, I couldn't make those calls at home with other people in the room listening, so I was allowed to come into the office and make those for confidentiality. So I think it just goes back to the individual circumstances and doing what's practical. I'm sure Colin will be able to sort of tell us if there's a more legal definition and what's reasonably practical. But I think we're all adults, and it's having that discussion and back to that communication. Obviously, it's down to individual employers if they decide. I know I do work with some employers who've given people an allowance of, in some cases, quite a generous payment to purchase desks and chairs, whereas others haven't been in that position and they've had to make the best of working on the dining room table, and then getting people back to the office when it's been safe to do so.
I think Google famously gave everyone $1,000 and said, "Off you go, get what you need." You know.
Yeah, I don't think I've come across anyone quite as generous as that, but I've certainly come across sort of £200-300 payments and things, which actually you probably could get quite a bit of stuff that you could comfortably and safely work from home, spending it wisely.
Interestingly, you mentioned. Sorry, Rack, carry on.
No, just to touch on what Michelle said, I think in the first year of lockdown, having the working from home tax relief sort of did help a very small extent. That it was nice to have something there, but did cut the bills and could be used towards your electricity or purchasing a desk or chair, and that did help a very small amount. But obviously now that's gone, and very conscious that's gone, and we've seen salaries change very slightly. But at the same time, like Michelle said, I think it's a complete contrast. Michelle, we work for the same organisation in the same team, but I can work from home. I've got no security issues at all in the slightest. Everything's all very comfortable. And but it just shows like Michelle said, it is an individual circumstance. We can be in the same team, same department, everything, but the way we work is so different. And yeah, individual responses, Tudor.
Absolutely. I was going to come to Colin again on this, because we touched very briefly, and Michelle, you mentioned about working in cafes and remote working, sort of co-working spaces, which again, they're on the rise very quickly. People aren't looking to commute all the way to London, and they're looking to see if they can commute, just sort of locally by bike to a local co-working space. It seems to be the idyllic situation if you can't set up from home or you don't want to be at home. We've always had mobile workers in the form of, reps or sort of consultants and stuff moving around. What what's the difference here between a mobile worker and a remote worker? Again, what are reasonable adjustments that an employer needs to make for either?
I mean, putting aside statutory rights to request flexible working, which don't go into any detail about kitting out offices or providing equipment or anything like that. It's just, can you work at home or can you work in the office or in a workplace? Yeah. In terms of an employer's obligation to provide kit, equipment, I mean, generally speaking, they have an obligation to provide what's reasonable rather than what's preferable or ideal. But very, very little case law on any of this for obvious reasons, because we haven't had like this. I mean, the only case I've come across that deals with anything like this was to do with providing tools to a workman in the 80s. And the chief wanted a particular set of tools because he liked them, and he was given a different set of tools he thought was rubbish.
Oh,
so he walked out and said, "This is you're making my job untenable." The court said they're reasonable tools. They may not want what you want. Well, tough luck. So you might want a top of the range iMac, and you might have a PC from somewhere else without offending anyone. Tough luck. If it does the job, it does the job. It may not be what you ideally want, but I'm not required to provide what you ideally want. Yeah. I may have to give you a monitor for the home office, but it doesn't have to be a snazzy curved one that does video graphics or whatever. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. So, yeah.
The tool, it does the job. Well, I don't like it. It's ugly. Well, tough. So there are limits to how far you have to go. Yeah. A lot of it comes down to, what do you contractually agree? When you agree to have someone work at home, what is the deal? Who's going to pay for the broadband?
Yeah.
I specify a minimum threshold for a broadband connection so they can be efficient, so they can be effective. Yeah. What's the obligation if it breaks? Do they just get to sit at home and do nothing for the day, or are they expected to come in the office? It's all this little nitty gritty stuff, which obviously, as I said, we've all muddled through until now because we've had no option to just go in the office, so we've had to muddle through.
So the real set of policy drafting is required here, really, to make sure you've got these things all sort of written down and ideally agreed and sort of discussed in advance before you sort of take that plunge again. Interesting. Moving it just a little bit to some of the more sort of soft stuff. I think you mentioned it earlier about, again, you have to agree as to what a reasonable sort of definition of working from home is, because obviously there are tax implications and a whole host of other things which you very kindly listed for us. How far, I'm going to ask the panel, how far afield would you recruit somebody? And is it essential that they need to be able to come into the office on demand? Rob, what's your answer to that question? How far afield would you recruit somebody to be a remote worker?
So that's actually kind of just become very relevant to us, because we were acquired at the early part of this year by an IT company based in Nottingham, and they've bought 7 other companies, and we've all come together as one group. Well, as we've just shown with the last 16th month of remote working, we can work with a guy based up at the Nottingham head office just as well as I can work with the guy sitting two desks down from me. So from that point of view, like to come together in this group, and we've said if you want to work for the Nottingham arm of the business, you don't have to be in Nottingham. You can be down here in Kent with us. So from that point of view, it really has opened up recruitment options for ourselves. A part of the business does require an on-site presence from time to time when things go kind of horribly wrong. So we have to be aware of that. We have to have enough staff in our area. But aside from that, yeah, we're open to kind of recruiting from across the country. And that's massive for our recruitment pool. Suddenly we've got talent from all over the country as opposed to just a specific area.
Interesting. Lewis, obviously an institution like yours, face-to-face is a particular learning style, very important. What about you? How far afield are you guys recruiting from now? Is it essential they have to be able to get into the office once a week? Or
so at present, for the majority of our programs, we are returning back to face-to-face delivery from September, because it helps prevent the digital divide with our students. It also helps with similar to what's been said on the calls, when you've got child trying to learn whilst mum or dad's trying to work in the background at home, and you're all sitting around the single dining room table. It's not a productive learning environment. So we do recruit further afield. One of I've got assessors that work for us that actually live over in sort of the other side of the water in Essex. We've got staff that travel up from East Sussex, that come up from Hastings to us at Maidstone. So we do have staff that travel further afield. I know we've got 3 or 4 managers that actually live up north that travel down during the week and stay away during the week, work at the college and travel home. So the big challenge is, as long as they can still get access to site, and whether that's they choose to travel or live locally and then do that, working on site is quite important for us. But we also have changed, some of our working practices. So whereas we would normally do a physical on-site visit every 10 weeks, we sort of did a bit of maths. We worked with our team, and I think we've worked out, just as a department, by not travelling, we've saved nearly 2,700 hours of lost time, either through travel or sitting in traffic, just by moving to a Zoom call.
This is the productivity side of things, isn't it?
Which the productivity has gone up. Yeah. We've also found, when we've got a learner picking up the phone going, I've got a problem, actually we can go, right, we'll send you a Zoom link, we'll dial straight into a call. We can now, like we are now, sit in a call face to face, but I've not had to drive down to Dover, or I've not had to go down to East Sussex, where we get East Sussex Highway apprentices come up. Actually, we can ring a learner, do a video call with a learner while they're sat on the factory floor, and actually we can give them that almost instantaneous support now, which actually, prior to some of the changes that we've had to adapt to through COVID, actually it would be I'll be at least 2 hours before I can get there. Are you still going to be there? Whereas now it can be a 10-minute turnaround and we're face-to-face in a call. So actually there are some quite good benefits to this for us.
Well, there are, absolutely, yeah.
For doing observations and assessments, we've got students setting up cameras or their mobile phone cameras connected to their work Wi-Fi on the end of a machine, and they're now letting us do an observation. that we're sitting at home doing remotely, we're still able to see everything they're doing. They're still able to take all their measuring equipment and show us the measurements so we can see it's done to tolerance, but we've not had to go and drive all around the county of Kent to do it.
And this is really where that sort of trying to pick the best of the situation, what we've learned, and combine it. Now, what's the furthest afield you've recruited somebody?
Unmute. So the furthest afield that we've recruited somebody, we've actually got somebody starting next week who's based up in the north. So they're based, I think, in York at the moment.
Okay.
And the way that we've gone about it is to make sure that in our WOW, the work when or where you want policy, we make sure that it states quite clearly that this is a business needs based policy. This is not a flexible working request, which Colin's covered quite nicely in terms of the legal respect. This is a working flexible policy. So we can say that we're happy to recruit remotely, but it all depends on that person's skills, the responsibilities they've got, what they need to get involved in, because at the heart of our business, we are client facing, and clients want face-to-face meetings. So as long as people are happy to be able to accommodate some of that and accommodate the business needs, we're happy to recruit remotely, with the caveat that there may be occasions they need to come into the office or travel down to meet a client, or if they're based in the area, which is a nice plus for us recruiting remotely, is that if we've got clients up there, we've got somebody already in place that can go and see them very quickly.
Interesting. And again, yours is an industry which I guess lends itself to that sort of setup. And I know there's been huge developments in VR and AR technology, and I know there's a few companies I know that are using service engineers who are working remotely using virtual reality and to be able to sort of advise clients on sort of machinery and kit and stuff. So I think that some industries are not lending themselves well to some of these situations, and they do need to be sort of physical presence. But it's interesting to see how it's going to creep into all of our side of things. So on that basis, then, this sort of moves us into the culture question. Really, is I'm going to ask opinions again of the panel. What type of meetings work best face to face, and what type of meetings work well on Zoom or equivalent? Colin. Obviously, sometimes people want to come and see you face to face, or can everything be done online?
Well, we're now doing court hearings online. So in theory, if you can do something as serious as a court case via a video call, which we're now doing, then in theory, you can do everything, pretty much anything online. Whether it's ideal is a different matter. I think most people would say that, for example, court cases, video hearings are not as effective as actually doing that in person in a court. So that's one example. As you say, sometimes it's things like pitch meetings and stuff. You can do initial stuff online. The marketing people tell me better than this, but you do actually want to meet somebody if you're going to work with them to a degree, actually meet them physically in an office ideally, and at least initially, even if it then becomes a more virtual relationship going forward.
So you could, the client side of things sort of lends itself quite nicely. What about the sort of the culture? Because of course you have people doing their articles and stuff, have students, student training packages and stuff. How's that going to work? It's
been a challenge. I mean, we have a trainee solicitor. Obviously they come in, they do 3 to 4 different seats across 2 years. We have one who come through our team in the last 6 months, and she's done 6 months in our team, and I've never met her. I've met her virtually, never physically actually met her, and she's first seat ever as a solicitor. She's not set foot in our office yet. Now she's done brilliantly, and we've made it work, but is it ideal? Not really.
So why do you say not really?
Because it's a very, how much you do learn by observing a lot of the time. And no matter how much you do Zoom calls, and no matter how much you talk regularly, you often observe and learn by seeing what's going on around you, by seeing how other people behave. And you also pick up on workplace culture by the example that those around you set. And you don't necessarily get that feel and that experience if you're sat in a room on your own in your spare bedroom, and the only experience you get is a call sort of half an hour each day.
Interesting. Now that sort of touches on the performance, the management, the well-being. This all sort of comes together with, we're referring to it as culture. And over the next sort of 6 months, we will establish a more permanent vocabulary around this type of thing. What type of meeting we're having? Is it going to be a Zoom meeting? Is it going to be a brainstorming face-to-face? And I'm sure the vocabulary will become more clear. Michelle, obviously from your side of things, culture and sort of communication is quite important. What's been the sort of the trend so far? What's been the sort of the preferred route to go down in terms of when you should be doing stuff online, when you should be coming together, and of course, bearing in mind some people have employees all the way as far afield as Nottingham and elsewhere. How's that going to work?
I mean, for our team, most of our staff live in Kent or Medway. We've got a few that live in Essex in the wider team and into the edge of London. I mean, obviously, we generally try to employ people with a bit of community, especially now community teams, people that know the community that they're working in, and are very much about sort of making collaborations with local businesses. So, I mean, in terms of clients, we've tended to stick to our initial meetings online. Obviously, it's nice to rather than me driving down to Ashford to meet a new business, it's better to do that on Zoom. It's much more efficient. In time, we will be going back to some face-to-face meetings, because there's some stuff we can't glean as to what's going on in terms of their culture if we're without visiting. So we can obviously ask questions, but actually there's a lot you pick up when you go to a premises or a workplace that you wouldn't see on a Zoom call, particularly if someone's got a background on. I mean, in terms of our own team, we tend to stick to our general quick catch-ups being online. We recently started having face-to-face meetings occasionally, so we had a team meeting face-to-face, which was we got together as it was more of a brainstorming and planning activity, so it was much better to be in person. We could write on the board and what have you, and some of our training works better face-to-face, although some of it has adapted really well online. So really, I think the real answer is it just depends on what the purpose of the meeting is. I know a couple of businesses I'm working with, one of them I said, oh, would you actually have a catch up? And he said, oh, I really can't do another Zoom call, I've just got Zoom fatigue. So we just met up at Capstone Country Park in Chatham, got a coffee, had a walk around the lake. We were outside 2 meters apart, but it was really productive. And actually there is some evidence about walking meetings and getting in the fresh air being good for our well-being and being productive. So I think it's just about trying what works for your team, works for your clients, and going with that, really.
I think you touched on something there again. It's about rethinking the way in which we approach that management of staff and time as well. How frequently, obviously with when you want, where you want, into the Sleeping Giants cases, it's worked really, really well. They've empowered their staff. They've made sure they've got the opportunities to be productive. But obviously there is that need to maintain the culture. And I think I read a couple of articles where a few large organizations were giving up their large office footprint and we're going to be using Airbnb to rent out a house for the day and bring the staff together and sort of do that bonding and culture stuff. Now coming back to you again, because you do have that sort of disparate workforce, how do you maintain the culture and the dynamic? The very nature of an organization, so for example, the Chamber is a very sort of warm and welcoming place. A lot of people like to come and visit there because there's a buzz going on and there's lots of events taking place. Obviously, it looks a bit like the Marie Celeste at the moment with bits of kit lying around and stuff. How have you maintained your culture and your team dynamic being sort of remotely working at the moment?
It has been a real challenge. And I think all businesses can say that culture and that motivation and productivity versus keeping everybody together has been a challenge. It's been difficult. Sometimes we get it right, sometimes we don't, and I'm probably the first person to put my hands up and say, yeah, that was kind of a failure, because we were trying to keep the same culture as we had in the office. So we were doing like endless quizzes, online parties, water cooler chats, meetings, updates, and we found that a little goes a long way, but obviously too much can drown a person. So we made sure that people knew that they could come to the office if they needed to, because the government advice was to work from home when you could. But we understood that, like we've talked about, there's childcare issues. There's the fact that one woman, I think, hadn't had an adult conversation for a few months. And I think she just needed to see adults, grown-ups, face to face. We've had people with severe mental health issues, and it was needed that they could come into the office. They couldn't work from home because they were posing like a risk to themselves, they were posing a risk to their mental health, they were posing a risk to the business side of things as well. So we made sure that office was available so that we could keep some of that face-to-face culture, but at the same time making sure that everybody knew that we had the COVID precautions taken taking place, because we needed to make sure that everything was as healthy and safe as possible. The communication side of things was really important, and everybody struggled or dealt with it in different ways. So we have something called a personal score that we take in team meetings and big meetings, and you just basically score from 1 to 10 how you're feeling. And if anybody scores below a 7, that prompts a follow-up and say, oh, I've noticed that was your personal score, what's going on? So that you're actually keeping that touch point with your staff, and it's not just a faceless team meeting. It's like, you know, you are an actual person, and we want to make sure that you're okay. Keeping people up to date on key developments within the business was really important, because that keeps that sense of togetherness. It's not just a functional thing. It's like, we are in this together as a business, and we as a business want to make sure that you know what's going on. And then recognise the efforts that people are making, because everybody had to pitch in. Everybody's had to be working hard. We've all had to adapt and evolve and pivot and all of those kinds of things. And we could do the praise and the appreciation back in the office really easily. It's kind of like, oh, awesome, really good job. And something as small as that gets completely missed. So we organised a celebration room where people could put in their chats, you know, their instant messaging that this was really awesome and I just want to shout out this person. And that's been fantastic. But then I think we've also sort of let the team lead decisions to a certain extent, knowing that we've got their trust in them, and they've got that accountability, working with them to determine, right, what's going to work. And from a team-led perspective, things like the cultural side of things work way better. I think there's a Brooklyn Nine-Nine quote, which is, why are you not having fun? We specifically requested it. And it's that kind of thing that as a management team, you can't turn around and say, you need to have fun, you need to have fun. It needs to come from the team as well. So we've got things like Dungeons and Dragons Club. I'm not a part of it, but it's there. We've got a book club, yoga club, fantasy football league, after we work drinks, there's a walking club. All of these things have been put in place and are led and driven by the team themselves. So it's not management saying, go and have fun, go and have fun. It's the team saying, I really enjoy this, I'm really passionate about it, who else is, and do you want to form some sort of group? And from that sense of, you know, togetherness, people are really enjoying those different groups, and there's something for everybody. And that, from a cultural perspective, has been a massive evolution, because we didn't necessarily have that before in the office. Everything was, you know, together in the office in a physical location. Now people are exploring those passions and those interests in smaller groups, but available to everybody, and then we'll often feedback about it. So, had an awesome time at Dungeons and Dragons, or, you know, yoga club was really I don't know, stretchy this morning. You know, doing that kind of thing.
That'll do as an adjective.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So from a cultural perspective, that's, you know, what we've embraced, is people taking a bit of accountability for it themselves, as well as the things that we're putting in place as a business to make sure that they've got that support and that structure. Sorry, that was a really long answer.
No, not at all. Not well. You're getting a lot of compliments and sort of endorsement from Michelle and the wellbeing team there, because obviously there's a couple of things here really that sort of come across to me really. One is I think McKinsey were talking about it in one of their recent reports. They talked about sort of the purpose, value, and culture will be key impact drivers for organisations moving forward now. You know, what is the culture? You know, what is the purpose of the organisation? Because we've sort of been built around the physical premises for most of us. Have been built around that physical premises, and obviously how that works. Obviously, certain industries, again, they've sort of already been sort of down this road, and sort of remote working has been sort of in place for a long time. But I think that sort of is quite a fundamental shift really, and some changes. So how you deal with the performance, the management, the culture, the dynamic, I think those are sort of really key things that people will need to sort of try and figure in. Not only have obviously got to work out the practicalities at the front end of the discussion around, you know, what is acceptable, what is remote working, how far afield can you be dialing in from France, you know, and so, and how often do we expect people to be on the phone? Which brings me to sort of the next question around sort of the management performance. Now, obviously, a lot of employers here anxious that people are going to be swinging their lead. You know, that they'll be sort of sat out in the sun with the laptop underneath the cardboard box and pretending to be very, very busy when actually they're not. How much is that a concern, do you think? And is it something, or is it a false concern? Is it something they shouldn't actually be worried about? And should they be really looking at, is the job getting done, and are they happy in their work, and sort of looking at different metrics? I'm going to ask you, Nell, and then I'm going to come across Michelle to see what your thoughts are, and then Colin, obviously, in terms of billable hours and stuff, there's some relevant questions there for you as well. So, Nell, how do you sort of manage the performance side of things?
Well, we as a business historically have always measured time. So when somebody's buying our services, they're not buying, in some cases, yes, they are buying packages, but for the most part for Sleeping Giant Media, we are sort of putting our time towards it, which means a certain amount has to be logged each day. So for us, as a client services department, it's quite a simple and effective way of measuring it, because we know that work when or where you want still means that you have to complete 7.5 hours throughout the day. And that's within a sort of a 24-hour period, making sure that you're taking your 11-hour breaks, blah, 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 as you'd expect from a legal perspective. So from us, those metrics are quite simple. And then through the entrepreneurial operating system, we also have identified some key metrics that help us identify how we're progressing, what we're aiming for, and this goes across the business. So in terms of people, it's how many holidays and sick are people taking, what kind of reactive HR are we looking at, what kind of proactive HR have we seen. Obviously with the sales perspective, it's how many proactive calls have you made, what's the pipeline looking like, how many closed, and it's those basic metrics and KPIs that help us then determine how things are going, from a pure data point of view. Obviously the best way of understanding how everything's going is by talking to people, but if you want a snapshot and you've got that data, we review these numbers every single week, so that's an important side of things from our business. Those are the key metrics that we look at.
That's interesting. Michelle, what's your sort of experiences on sort of how best to sort of try and measure, monitor? Is it too much to have webcams installed in people's back offices, back rooms, and seeing who's logging on at what time of day and stuff like that?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think we need to go to the point of having webcams. I mean, we've all read about businesses trying to do that, but I think there is the technology available where you can monitor if people are logged in. And a number of businesses using Microsoft Teams, and that will show you if someone is offline or away from their desk. But it's about being adults, isn't it, having that conversation. So if people are working flexibly, it's actually perfectly reasonable to ask them to put their working hours in their Outlook calendar so you can see when they're meant to be at their desk or when they're meant to be working, so then you know when you can or can't contact them. If you don't want to be contacting someone at 3 o'clock in the afternoon if they've gone to pick up their children from school, they might be logging in again sort of 6 p.m. to make up that time, or to have client meetings. I think it's about being adults, but I mean, my personal view is I think the people that are stretching this are the ones that would have stretched this in the office before and perhaps been on social media or not working as hard as some of their colleagues. I think we probably all know colleagues that we've maybe worked with in the past that might be guilty of this. But yeah, again, using that technology and obviously making sure you're monitoring that performance to begin with, because it's very difficult to bring things up if you've never monitored it in the past. Having those regular catch-ups, checking output and workload with people, not to sort of check up on them and accuse them of not doing anything, but to make sure that on the other side of the coin that they're not staying logged in too long, not doing too much, and that they're taking their breaks as well. Just having those open conversations.
Conversation. I think talking, regular communication, I think is a lot to do with it. Colin, just as far as sort of performance monitoring, obviously you guys record billing hours. Do you worry about whether someone's at their desk from 9 o'clock till 5 every day?
Yes and no, because whether you've billed a certain number of hours a day isn't the be all and end all of the job. For a starting point. But I mean, we are lucky in that we have that metric for fee earners. The nature of our business means that there is something you can monitor to go, are you doing something? Yeah. Because if you can't see it, there is the worry of, are they doing it? Well, we have a way of checking that's not too intrusive. The difficulty is where you've got a type of job where it's a bit harder to have daily metric output, let's say, that you can monitor to know whether someone is actually doing the job. And we've all, I mean, we as a business, we all have probably as a business, we have had scenarios where we have had almost ghost employees at times during lockdown, where they've just seemingly been, let's just say, on busy throughout an entire day, yet their diary would reveal that they're not, and you can't figure out where the heck they are, what they're doing. Again, it all comes back to, ideally, if you're going to manage someone's performance, you need clear parameters and rules to do that against. Being the lawyer, I'd always come back to, well, what are the rules? Because people ring me up and go, oh, I've got an employee, he doesn't seem to be doing anything, I can't get hold of him, he never answers the phone, I don't know where he is. And it's like, well, but what are the expectations? What are the rules? What have you actually set down as being, oh, they're working from home, so we kind of let them do what they want. It's like, but then that makes it very hard to police.
Yes.
If the rules are, well, they can work when they like, as long as they get the job done. It's like, well, what's getting the job done look like if the rules are as flexible as they can work whenever they like and how they like and where they like?
Absolutely. So, yeah.
The flexible world is great on the one hand, but it's harder to actually police poor performance on the other hand if you've got it, unless you've got some clear lines that you can hold people to.
Rob, you guys work remotely, have done for a long time, lots of people on different projects. How do you manage the performance of the team? Make sure you're getting your pound of flesh.
Yeah, it's kind of going back to what Nell said, really, just having the right KPIs in place and then being able to track those. And we obviously have quite a few technology solutions where we can quickly bring up a dashboard and see if everything's green, well, you know, we're happy, you know, and everything, and if things are red, we've got to find out why they're red. But I found that actually people were working too many hours. Like they were going well into the evening, and that was a challenge we had to kind of deal with in the initial part of the first lockdown, was just to make sure that people aren't working too long. You know, actually find a way of taking the breaks you should take, and kind of stick to your hours, as in don't work more than them, you know. So I hope that this kind of 16 months that people have had have kind of put the fallacy away that people won't work when they're at home because no one's standing over their shoulder or things like that. I was really impressed with within our company of how much work people got done, having shift to remote working. So and that there are monitoring tools that you can get. We've had customers phone us up and ask if we can put monitoring tools in, because they've had that fear, you know, are people doing the work that they should be doing? So it's possible to get those, but from our point of view, we've never felt the need to. Like we've tracked the KPIs, we've seen the work's getting done. And as I said, like we almost had it the other way. It's like you're working well into the evening, you got to stop doing that.
Yes, well, that's right. There's the danger of overwork, isn't there? Really, again, sort of policing people, make as much for their own sort of safeguarding as it is for sort of getting productivity out of people as well. The solutions obviously will come, I guess, as you know, the technology adapts to the need and sort of more responses and stuff like that. One of the other interesting dynamics that we're seeing, of course, and I think Colin, you were talking earlier about sort of the environmental aspect, and where's the measure, where's the evidence to suggest that remote working is more environmentally sound than perhaps sort of coming into the office. And I think actually it's probably more visible at a macro level. And I think this is where we're seeing well-documented arguments between London landlords at the moment, saying we've got to get people back into the city. Well, they would say that. And a lot of commuters are thinking, well, actually, I don't need to now, because I can sort of put the kids to bed and I can go for a run in the morning, and I'm still putting in my 9 hours, 10 hours of work without having to sort of do that. So there is obviously going to be some conflict, and some sort of different agendas are going to be pushed and promoted as time goes forward. But I think what we may see is sort of a reinvestment in the suburbs, you know, where the town will actually, and I think if you look at Tunbridge Wells as a case point, which was traditionally a very strong commuter town into London, the number of co-working spaces that are being established by city firms in the locality to allow their workforce to work in co-working space. They're not stuck at home, but they can go into the office to still maintain some sort of social aspect to it, albeit with a mixed employee base there. But recognizing the need to commute perhaps isn't necessarily as important as it needs to be, which goes back to, I guess, to sort of the question being, how often would you expect someone to come into the office? You know, in terms of just, again, giving you a base and a premise and stuff like that. Do you have that written down, Rob? Do you have everybody in at least once a month, once a quarter?
Yeah, so kind of being on premise, the way we worked at the moment is put together a roster where everyone's doing 2 days a week. as a minimum, like we've got a couple of people who are in every day because they want to be in every day. They didn't enjoy remote working through various different things. So as we spoke about, some people are kind of makeshift spaces in the house, and that become tiring. There's internet issues as well. So yeah, thankfully now with the kind of change in the restrictions, like we've given the option, if you want to come in for the whole week, you can be in for the whole week. We just asked for 2 weeks minimum so we can keep the numbers down and try and keep everyone safe and keep everyone spread across the office, and easier to manage that way. But yeah, again, it's trying to balance the coin. Some people have absolutely loved remote working and some people have hated it, you know. So again, trying to find a solution that makes everyone happy.
Rack and Michelle, obviously in your situation, is there an obligation for you guys to come in on a certain number of times a month or a week, or?
We haven't. I think it is quite a difficult thing at the moment. We've had loose conversations around potentially going into the office once every 2 weeks, but we have also had messages from the council that also say, you know, we want to carry on working from home. So it's finding a balance with the team, speaking to our line managers, working out what is the best sort of solution, and is it ultimately necessary for us to be in. I think Michelle, she goes into the office a couple of times a week, which I haven't done. I've been into the office twice in the last 18 months, because I can just work from home. So it's absolutely fine. And it's just having it. I think I understand, and for me, I know when I need to go into the office, and if I do need to, I'll make that clear, speak to the team, make sure I've got a desk booked and all of them kind of things, make sure it's safe. But I think there's also a lot of other fears as well. I think a lot of people just generally have a little bit of anxiety and a bit of worry, get a bit worried about going in particular. I think we have a lot of people that have turned into germaphobes, and sort of fearing, you know, just rather be safe than sorry. But ultimately, if we don't need to be there, I won't be there. But at the same time, I've got a member of staff, like, I can't remember who said it, but she's been with us for the best part of 6 months. I haven't met her in the slightest. She's between Ramsgate and Derbyshire, so it's very tough. And ultimately, her job's pretty much on the phones, so I don't really require her. But I have said to her that I would like to see you potentially once a month. And you know,
do you think there's a risk? There's a risk to loyalty on that? Obviously, being part of the company, because if you never met them, if you've never met the team, and again, I think we're all probably starting to get in that position where we've recruited staff we've never actually met in person. How does that? Do you think that's a sort of makes them less loyal, less committed?
No, I think it works both ways. I think to an extent, I think from my end, I've had to put in a lot of work to make sure that she feels part of the team. Not isolated, but at times she sort of kind of likes being like that as well. So I've had to listen to what she's had to say and take on everything. But at the same time, she understands from my perspective and the organisation's perspective that, you know, this isn't this is like a false reality. You know, in a real world, we would have been in the office, would have been talking to your colleagues and doing all of these things, and the whole conversation about working from home wouldn't have existed. But ultimately, the way we are, it has just been a lot of effective communication and listening to what that person needs. And ultimately, like I say, she's been going between Ramsgate and Derbyshire for health and family purposes and things like that, which, you know, fully respect, but also trying to manage that as well, because there's been a lot of well-being issues as well. So for me, when I was discussing this with Michelle yesterday, when we got the questions sent over by Molly, it was sort of, communication is just the key thing in all of this, and it's effective communication and being able to just having that strong dialogue, whether it be in a formal or an informal setting, to be able to express what's going on for your well-being, but also you've got to meet the organisation's minimum requirements as well.
You mentioned the questions, and one of them in there was about burnout. And interestingly, one of the very early studies on remote working was done by IBM, probably back in the 70s now. And they did an experiment, and they sent everybody home and they work for a while, but they had to bring everybody back in after 6 months because actually people were just getting burnt out. They were working long hours. They felt because they were sort of at home and they needed to be uber productive because they were worried they might be forced to be not necessarily sort of doing stuff, and so there was a pressure to sort of really try and perform and stuff. Is that something, Michelle, just, in terms of your experiences already, how do people deal with that? How do you sort of, as a management team, perhaps keep an eye on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's back to the same things we've been talking about throughout the morning, really. It's about keeping those good communication channels open and equipping line managers to recognise those signs in people. So if you do notice you've got colleagues logged on at 7 in the morning, still logged on at 7 p.m. in the evening, or sending emails late at night, I mean, typically when we were in the office, that could be a sign of other things, or if you can sort of sense people's stress, having regular check-ins with them. Mental Health First Aid England, obviously they do some great mental health first aid training, but they have got a free-to-use resource. I'll pop the link in the chat in a minute. It's a line manager's guide. It's got some really great tips and advice on how line managers can support their colleagues. Obviously, most line managers don't have a background in health and well-being and what to look for, but actually there are some key things you can implement to having those regular communications, regular catch-ups with people, that two-way conversation, encouraging people to take their lunch break. So if people are working late into the evening and that works for them, then that's great. That might be a productive time for them. But what we want to do is get away from people having burnout by sitting at their desk for 12 plus hours a day. Just because you're not commuting anymore doesn't mean you have to be chained to the desk. You can go for a run before work, you can take an hour for lunch, you can go and get your food shopping in the afternoon when it's maybe not so busy, as a lot of the supermarket chains are recommending to go at less busy periods. So make that work-life balance work for you. But just
well, absolutely. I mean, just getting to see a GP or your dentist, you've always have to sort of go whatever time they say is available.
Exactly.
And if that's and if you're in the office, of course, often that means sort of the journey home, then again. So yeah, there's some real merits to it. I'm just looking at the clock there, so we're sort of 10:48 of my time. And one of the things we've talked a lot about, the sort of the obligations, and Colin's been really helpful in that in terms of some of the requirements, the IT side of things, what we sort of need to have, and considerations around the infrastructure. How we try and keep the culture of our organisation alive. How we have a purpose and identity when we are essentially so disparate now and no longer sort of congregating in the one place to sort of bond and identify with each other. There is a commercial aspect to all of this, of course. The argument being, of course, actually, if I've got all my staff working from home, I don't need such a large office footprint, and actually I can reduce my overhead significantly by getting people to work from home. I'm also getting more productivity because they're banging in more hours. So there's some real commercial pluses here to the side of this. Are there commercial gains to be had by putting people into remote working situations? Do you feel that that's a sound space, sound approach, or is it really about responding to the worker's needs and therefore a happy worker is a productive worker? Nell, what about your side of things?
I mean, I think it's already been mentioned. It's undeniable that people's productivity at home has skyrocketed. We've seen that sickness levels have plummeted. We've seen that people are sort of spending more time on their computers and less time around the water cooler and all of that kind of stuff. And in terms of productivity, I think they figured at the start of the pandemic, everybody was working at least 5 additional hours per week, which is just bonkers when you look at it in those kinds of terms. But that's not necessarily a good thing. Productivity in the short term does not mean productivity in the long term. So I think it is extremely sort of based on that individual. If you're happier being remote, and you do still, even in a company like ours where we pride ourselves on our culture and making sure that people have fun things to do as well as the more business minded things to do, we've still got people who just want to come in at 9, want to have their lunch at 1 o'clock, and they want to leave at 5:30. They don't want to get involved in any of that, and for those people this remote working has worked exceptionally. But then when it comes to those who enjoy the cultural side of things, remote working isn't necessarily always the best thing, which is why we encourage people to come in and meet each other, because doing stuff like this is a very functional way of communicating, and you don't necessarily get to build those relationships, fully. You can make up as much as you want through good onboarding, making sure that you're having regular touch points. The communication side of things is, I think this is the biggest lesson that we're taking away from this, is communication is key. but there are still some personalities and still some benefits to meeting up in the office and having those face-to-face things, or, you know, as we were talking about, doing the walking meetings, the walking lunches, the walking communications. Those kinds of things help build that bond, and it is scientifically proven that we are social animals. We enjoy being in the company of one another for the most part, and you know, the chemical changes within our bodies to reacting to being within a group setting, or at least with another person, those are all things that help build that bond, help build that culture, help build that you know, that loyalty. So I wouldn't strike off either as being, you know, the be all or end all. Some people, remote working is going to be perfect, but some people, they need to have that interaction, and I think that's why you've got to have those discussions with individuals rather than making blanket rules.
I think that's really helpful and really sort of insightful as well. I think interestingly, I guess it depends. If you owned a massive commercial floor space in London, you might be having sort of slightly more focused conversations around, hang on, which is the best financial way to go here.
Yeah, I've actually got a colleague who works up in London, and they've got 3 floors of exactly that. It's a huge space, and they've spent millions, obviously, on making sure that it's the best place possible to work. And they are instructing people that they have to be in at least 2 days a week. And a lot of their colleagues have moved out, and they've moved to Nottingham, or they've moved up really north. Some people living in Scotland, but they still have to attend the office 2 days a week. And I know that obviously, I think it was Google's been in trouble recently for saying, you know, no to remote working, but then the person who said no to remote working has moved over to New Zealand. So it's stuff like that. You know,
yeah, do
so
like I say, but not as I do. Yes.
Yeah. So entirely dependent on the company. For us, we're in a really positive position, and we're really lucky to be in this position, but it's not going to be possible for everybody.
Well, I think probably declaring some interest as a Kent Chamber of Commerce, obviously our interest is very much around the business community and the Kent economy. So in trying to encourage large city firms to let their employees work at co-working space down here in Kent. And one of the byproducts of the lockdown we saw was a sudden explosion of high-end coffee shops in Cranbrook High Street, where a lot of the city folk who used to enjoy their expensive lattes and things now no longer sort of went out, but actually wandered around the corner to buy very nice coffee from from their local shop. So actually, the local economy can do very well with people not commuting. So yeah, we'd obviously be biased and encourage a lot of London exodus. Would be great for us down in the economy here in Kent. Okay, it is 10:53 by my clock, so I'm just going to review some of the questions here to make sure we've covered everything. So, staff want to book a desk in their office, work laptops. Okay, there's a software question. So, any recommendations on a lot of people moving to hot desk situations? This one's for you, Rob. There must be some apps and stuff out there that are sort of already being created or developed in response to sort of this sort of thing. Hot desk booking, that sort of thing. Any suggestions?
Two that have worked really well for us. We use Microsoft Teams, and that's almost become like a huge, humongous business function. It's file sharing, it's cloud-based, it's video calls, it's got a chat feature. So much happens of our work within Microsoft Teams. So that's been really good for us. And the second one is our phone system. We've got a VoIP phone system, which means I can put an app on my phone, and now if someone calls my office phone, I get it on my mobile, and that happens across the whole business. So basically, we've got our office phone set up on us at all times. That's helped for our customers getting hold of us, and also maintaining a level professional approach to it as well. You just dial our main number, and you're still through to the same reception you'd get before. They can still transfer you over to anyone in the business as they normally would, and it's a much nicer approach to it. And then obviously you don't have people having to hand out their personal phone numbers and things like that. So those two have definitely been really good for us, helping with productivity and also just that kind of a professional approach as well within the business.
Excellent. Yeah, I know we've yeah, a lot of people got phones on their desks from the office and things like that, and actually the app on it could be, I guess, is that your personal phone? You just have the app on your personal phone, is it? Or?
Exactly. Yeah, I've just installed this is my own mobile, and I've installed the app on it. And when that phone rings, it rings here and I can pick it up and act exactly the same as I would on that office phone.
Excellent, that's great. Okay, just checking out these other questions here. Colin, the nightmare that is self-isolation, which hopefully will soon come to an end. I think the 16th of August they're talking about, or thereabouts, they're talking about that. Many of us, the parents in the room here, would have had that phone call from school saying, come and pick up your child. If they brushed past someone in the corridor who is now possibly tested positive, so come and get them and take them away. And so you're stuck. There's going to be all sorts of questions around this in terms of employer obligations and stuff like that. COVID jabs. Can employers insist that everyone's going to be double jabbed before they come back in? And do they have to sort of insist on negative tests if they've sort of had a positive test and stuff like that? What are some of the guidelines around this so far?
In terms of self-isolation, as far as I know, the rules are still that if you are told to self-isolate by the test and trace authorities, not by the app, that you legally have to do it. And I think as an employer, you're legally not supposed to let them come to work if you know that's the case. And that remains the case at the moment. If you're pinged by the app, although it's not exactly crystal clear when you read the government's guidance page, it is only guidance that you stay away, but it's guidance at the moment that most people are therefore following, and that's what's causing a lot of the issues at the moment with stripped bare, and that's obviously why there's a lot of pressure on that at the moment. But as a matter of law, it's only if test and trace tell you. But it is a bit difficult for employers if people are being pinged by the app to say, well, that's all right, just come in. Because there obviously are risks to doing that. Yeah, and that's why at the moment they're looking at changing all that. In terms of vaccinations and jabs and so on, that's a whole topic we don't have much time to get into today.
Yeah.
We have, as Bracious, done a number of online webinars which are all recorded and should be accessible on our website on exactly this issue: vaccinations, testing, jabs or no jabs in the workplace. So if you go to our website and you go to our knowledge sort of area, you will find recorded webinars that are half an hour or an hour long, dealing with exactly the issues and the pros and cons of having no jab, no job type policies.
I think we will come back to that another day, and I think again referencing the sort of library of archive of webinars and conferences you guys have got is brilliant. There's some really good information there, so pop over to the Bracious website and navigate your way through to some of the video content they've got there. It's been really helpful. Okay, just checking if there's any more questions coming in from the live chat. It doesn't look like it. I think we're all probably starting to sympathise with each other on the school situation. And refusing to allow children to mix with anybody over the summer holidays, just in case it curtails our holiday plans. So I think this is a conversation that is obviously going to run and run. It's going to be one that we will all evolve and adapt. But I think there's some absolutes which have been shared with us today, thanks to our panel. Not least of which is get around the table and agree what everybody means, get the definitions down, what is acceptable, what are the limitations, what are the rules around working from home. Get that agreed first, get that written down, and then you can sort of start to move forward with some of the infrastructure and some of the setup and arrangements that are there. Communication is key. But the right type of communication is key, making sure that you are not drowning them in telling them everything, but you are sort of telling them things that help them feel part of the culture and the community that is work. Having set the rules and set the sort of communication and that culture sort of ambition, then that will also help in terms of your recruitment policies and how far afield you want to go. Making sure that your team are set up for success as far as their technology is concerned, and being reasonable about some of the steps that you can take in terms of helping them get themselves set up. But it's not an all or nothing. And I think the hybrid approach is the best of both. And I think that's really where we can get to. There are some distinct benefits in certain sectors, but there's also some distinct challenges in other sectors. Again, trying to educate people is very difficult to do it over online. It needs to be side by side or face to face. And I think there are, for every business, there will be opportunities where you can take some of the good things that you've experienced and save time, save money, save the environment. but obviously there are some things which just need to be done face to face. And I think those involve any sort of creative or educational type environment where you want to share ideas and feed off each other's body language. And remembering that socializing and the interaction doesn't necessarily have to take place within the office. It can be walking a dog. It could be meeting up for a cup of coffee. It could be anywhere. So I think there's some real lessons to learn just to change our thinking around this. And again, we all care for each other. And I think, there's been suggestions around workplace buddies and things like that to try and make sure that people aren't getting lost in the noise and sort of allowed to drift to the periphery and then be forgotten about, and whatever concerns they have. So I think it puts a bit more pressure on some of the management, but again, nothing that wasn't already there in the first place. It's just about doing it in a different style. But ladies and gentlemen, I think our time is done here this morning. Thank you so much indeed to our panel, to Rob, to Colin, to Nell, Michelle, Rack, and of course Lewis. Thank you all very much indeed for joining us this morning. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your comments and suggestions. I hope you all stay well, stay safe, and enjoy the good weather. But for now, thank you very much indeed, and enjoy the rest of your day. Goodbye.